Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of KleenWerks Auto Detailing. Today's episode is part 3 of coating a Cayenne. In this episode, we will be restoring the paint protection film as well as correcting out the black paintwork. Now, before we actually get into the paint correction process, you see me taping off any sort of plastic trim, any sort of rubber seals, gaskets, etc., etc. Now, do you have to do this on every single car? No, but I do recommend you guys tape off any sort of plastic trim because you don't want your polisher possibly going onto those areas, causing staining or potentially damaging the surface. Now, I am going overboard on this particular car because it's black. So if I were to go over any rubber seals, any sort of plastics, I will pick up either some of that material or the contaminants that are on it. And not only will that potentially damage and dirty up my polishing pad, when I go onto a painted surface to continue polishing, it will reintroduce those contaminants and that dirt onto the paintwork, and you will be able to notice because it is black. So that's why I'm going overboard. You guys, I would just recommend to tape off any sort of plastic trim. I'm using varying different thicknesses of tape. You guys can use these at your discretion. It takes a little bit more time to do, but it does save you a headache in the long run. Okay, we got the whole car taped off. It's ready for some paint correction. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the series, this vehicle is getting a 2-stage paint correction. And depending on the severity of defects in your paintwork, your vehicle might only require a single-stage correction. You can even use an all-in-one polish, or you might have to do multiple stages of correction. But this customer is only paying for a 2-stage correction, and frankly, I really enjoy working on Porsche Black just because the paint is soft, but it's not so soft that you look at it the wrong way and you'll see haze or pigtails or things like that. So Porsche Black is very enjoyable for me to work with. It honestly doesn't require a lot of effort, and a 2-stage paint correction on this specific car is going to be more than enough. Now, in front of me, you guys can see that I have 4 different pads and 4 different polishes and compounds. Let's start with these 2. So I mentioned that this car does have paint protection film. This is what we're going to be using to restore and correct the paint protection film. Now, I'll talk about more on how to actually restore and correct paint protection film once we get into the actual correcting part. But basically, we'll be using Rupes fine polish with a yellow pad, and then we're gonna finish it off with some 3M Perfected and a very fine white foam pad from Rupes. So for the paint, this combination in front of me, to my left or your right, is what I found to work the best. Now, I'll still do a test spot since every vehicle is different, but when I work on Porsche Black, this is usually what works and produces the best results. We have a microfiber correcting pad from Meguiar's with Jess Carr's correction compound. And then we're gonna be using Sonak's Perfect Finish with a very fine white pad. Guys, if you do not have this in your detailing arsenal, whether you do Porsches, BMWs, whatever cars, single stage cars, whatever, buy this. Every car loves Sonak's Perfect Finish. This stuff is a must-have in your detailing arsenal. And of course, I have my trusty Rupes Mark III. This is an LHR 15. Yeah, guys, we'll do the test spot. I'll bring you in a little bit closer and let's just get to it. I always recommend doing a test spot. It doesn't matter how good of a detailer you are. Every single vehicle is different. Every single type of paint is different. And as you guys can see, since I spent the time taping off those areas, I don't really have to worry about my polisher hitting any of the plastic trim. Okay, so just by looking at it right now with no light, you guys can tell that this side definitely it has a lot more clarity than this side right here. This is how the paint looked like, or still looks like. A lot of imperfections, a lot of scratches, swirls, hazing, kind of dull, mostly blue. And then we move over here to the corrected side. Now this is just with the correcting compound. As you guys can see, it does have holograms in it. It is pretty hazy. However, that's what the second step is for. So while this looks bad and this doesn't look as refined, this doesn't have those deep scratches in it. There might be some residue left from the polish, but that's okay. Non-corrected, just corrected with the correcting compound. I really don't even think that I need to shine a light. You see the tape line down the middle? Yep, that's a pretty huge difference. So, pretty disgusting, horrible Porsche black. Not a single mark. While you guys are enjoying the time lapse, I just want to say one thing about a two-stage paint correction. The first stage is always your cutting stage, meaning you're removing a bulk of the imperfections with a cutting compound and a cutting pad. Then the second stage is you're actually refining the paintwork to get rid of any of the hazing or marring that the cutting compound might induce. Now, I'm not going to go into depth about paint correction just because there's plenty of other videos on YouTube that do a much better job explaining that. And as you guys saw right there, I just taped off that edge, and that's because the rear bumper has PPF on it. You don't want your polisher catching on that and potentially damaging the edge. Right here, guys, this is a fantastic tool. It allows you to do pretty good edge work, as we detailers call it. This is basically a door stop. It hooks in onto the latch on the door. The other end has a hook and it latches so you can actually leave the door open, continue polishing, and you don't really have to worry about potentially getting onto the other panel that you just spent a bunch of time correcting and then having to do it again. It's very important to keep your pad clean, so if you have an air compressor, then just set your machine to speed 3 and go ahead and blow out your pad. If you don't have an air compressor, just go ahead and wash it out and dry it. Now, this gets rid of any dried compound or polish that might be in your machine, as well as it increases your polishing performance from the pad. So moving on to the PPF or paint protection film portions of this car. Now, I wouldn't recommend you do this if you're not familiar with a polishing machine or this is your first time doing this, just because paint protection film is a little bit finicky to work with. Now, it's not paint. You guys have to remember that. So when you are polishing out paint protection film, you want to make sure to pay attention to your edges. You don't want to ruin those and potentially cause any damage to them. And you want to keep the machine moving at a relatively faster pace than you would on the paintwork, just because the PPF does have a tendency to absorb a lot of heat from the machine. Therefore, you might cause some sort of warping or potentially damage it. Now, if you get a little bit of polish or residue on the edges, it's not a big deal. Just take some isopropyl alcohol and use your microfiber towel to wipe it away. Now, this PPF on this car, it's pretty hammered. That's the only reason why I'm going to be going over it twice. Usually, you don't want to continually polish out the PPF just because you don't want to risk damaging it. However, like I said, this stuff's pretty hammered. It makes sense to go over it twice. So that's what I'm doing. However, you do want to start with the least aggressive method first, or least aggressive polishing, and see what the results are and go from there. Now we're coming up to the end of the video. I really want to thank you guys for sticking around. Stay tuned for part 4, which is the prep and coating. I'll see you in the next one. Stay clean.